Hello and welcome to this week's A Photographic Life. Soon after starting this podcast back in March 2018, I decided to ask photographers from around the world one simple question. I also gave them a simple way of answering it. The question was, what does photography mean to you? The way of answering that question was complete freedom. However, they had to answer that question in under 5 minutes. They then sent me the audio and I dropped it into the episode without hearing it and then responded directly afterwards. Quite often, people would send me their contribution and ask me if it was okay. I always said it was, although I'd never listened to it. Cards on the table at this point. Anyway, this summer, this August, I thought it would be interesting to revisit some of those contributions by bringing an eclectic mix of photographers together each episode to hear their insights, their experience, their knowledge, and also, on a number of occasions, their humour. So, sit back, get yourself a drink, and enjoy a revisit of what does photography mean to you?
What does photography mean to me? OK, Grant, I'm going to answer this question in 3 parts. Part 1, Bill Brandt. Can it be a coincidence that you've asked me this question now, in May 2020? For whether you know it or not, this month marks precisely the 50th anniversary of the moment when I made up my mind to become a photographer. May 1970. I was 18 years old and up in London from the West Country, where I was completing my 10th year in boarding school. Yes, I'd been sent away as an 8-year-old, but I hadn't thrived and was filled with something far more furious than mere adolescent rage. Anyway, this was a school trip and I was in my uniform. I went to the Hayward Gallery and I saw the Bill Brandt retrospective, and it blew my socks off. Here I was, a D-grade student, certain of only one thing, that I knew nothing. I knew no one working class, I knew no women, no one of colour. I'd never been in a factory, I'd never been in an office. As I say, nothing, but I was fizzing with curiosity. And here were the photographs of a man who taught himself about the world by using his camera like a passport to slip between the social classes. And as soon as I'd understood what he'd done, I knew that I wanted to do it too. OK, part 2. As someone who's been in documentary practice for half a century, I sometimes get asked to cough up my rules of engagement. So here they are. The brief version is always treat people as individuals, never as types. And read Let Us Now Praise Famous Men by James Agee and Walker Evans, because it's the Bible. Here's the longer version. 1. Know why you're doing your work, who you're doing it for, and where those represented by it can see it when it's finished. 2. Practice explaining what you do, including who benefits from it. Be clear and succinct. 3. When deciding your subject matter, research it on the ground and in books. Familiarise yourself with all the ways in which it has already been covered and begin work only if you think you can bring something new to it. 4. Once you've committed to a project, immerse yourself in it. Live close to it, as close as you can, and in a way that's sustainable. Nothing must be more important than your work. 5. Work by yourself and be disciplined. Do it for at least 8 hours every day and do it as well as it can be done. 6. Make a habit of engaging with strangers, particularly with people whose opinions and attitudes are not your own. Be polite. Don't argue. Listen. Be curious and respectful. 7. Celebrate wonder. 8. Catalogue everything you produce as you go along. 9. Don't call yourself an artist. 10. Don't expect anyone to be interested in what you've done for at least 20 years. OK, and now here's the final part of my answer to your question. What does photography mean to me? Making photographs has taught me to learn only from the best. And just now, because I've been looking at his new book, The Station, I'm inclined to think the best living British photographer is probably Chris Killip. His work always reminds me of what's required of a documentary photographer. Killip has self-belief, modesty, an enviable immersion in subject matter, and a dedicated focus. He shines not only because of his talent and complete technical grasp of the medium, but because his work is human, brilliantly envisioned, uncompromising, yet utterly devoid of satire. He knows the names of the people in his pictures. He cares about them. He's engaged with them. He's on their side. While capable of irony, he's never ever cruel in his intent. He knows his place within the recent history of the medium. He's brave and he puts in the hours. The sacred thing at the heart of Killip's practice is his engagement with and responsibility towards the people who've entrusted him with their representation. That's what photography means to me too. And just maybe some of this is what I saw as being the possibilities of a career in documentary practice for myself when I turned up as a schoolboy at the Hayward Gallery and saw the Bill Brandt retrospective all those years ago.
Hi, I'm Brian Griffin, and I'm one of the most boring photographers on earth. I don't even really like photography that much. Where did this all start? Well, I have to go back to when I was 16 years old, and I had to leave school. Parents made me leave school because I needed some money, so I ended up in the factory, the last place on earth I ever wanted to be. But in many ways, it proved quite fruitful. When I got out of the factory and went to art college, I was really equipped mathematically. I'd studied engineering. I was involved in nuclear engineering. And I knew a lot about maths. So after going to art college and leaving to try and get a career in photography, I was well equipped mathematically. So all that analog stuff where you had to really understand lots of scientific things and exposure things, which people today would find most complex, well, quite complex. It was dead easy for me because I could do all that stuff, you know. Because I'd ended up doing 5 years of engineering and I was really right on top of analog photography and all the complexities of it. So I got to an advanced stage with that, exploring light. I was just basically interested in light. Nothing else really photographically. I wanted to see how far I could take light. And then came the digital universe. And I could do that as well because I got this, technical mind. And I could use all this digital advances, all these digital advances to my benefit. And I'm still not that interested in photography. I just use it, really, and I've always truly used it just to collect my ideas. I just use it to sort of put down evidence on an idea I've got. And a lighting idea I have, a lighting development I have, I just sort of put it down so I can look at it. How my brain's been working. So there you are, really. I'm a photographer that is not really interested in photography.
Hi Grant, this is Polly Alderton here, answering your question of what does photography mean to me. I found it quite tricky to answer this actually, but I've been thinking about it on and off this week. I think I've always been more comfortable as a spectator rather than a sort of participant in life. I really seem to notice little things. I think I've always been like that. When I was growing up, we moved quite a lot, really spontaneously, quite often. So things would change in my surroundings quite quickly. And I used to like scouring pictures for details, like maybe a lost ornament or the way that a curtain sat and, the light in the room. Photography kind of offers a permanence. It's almost verbatim. And of course, photography can be quite manipulative too. I'm endlessly curious about the thematic apperception test, how our individual experience can shape our perception of some images into different forms. One of my children recently was telling me about a program they'd watched that explained how when you're taking a photograph, in that moment, you won't remember the memory. I've been thinking about that and looking at photographs that I have taken. I think it might actually be true. In that moment, you don't remember the memory, but because maybe your brain doesn't need to, such is the fallibility of memory versus technology. Photos are like the closest thing we have to time travel. They're momentary evidence which, unlike our own memories, they don't degrade or alter when we return to them. There's the ethics of memories, if you like. So perhaps when we pull memories from our stores, they can become reformed by our current experiences. A photo stays faithful. When I'm photographing my family, I'm often doing it as a spectator. And I think quite often I'm memory hoarding too, kind of for the future. I think about how often, I live in the present versus how much I like to preserve the now for future reference. So for me, photography is a kind of proof of memory, my memory. And maybe in some way it also becomes a portrait of me too. And this feels significant within the pictures that I take of my children, of my family. I've often had this thing of saying, that I feel like I'm sort of growing up alongside my children, reliving my childhood through their childhood too. So to document that feels important, and it's almost sort of reliving my past within my present for the sake of the future, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. I hope that was interesting to you. Thanks so much, Grant. Bye.
Hi, I'm Mark Stienmetz. I'm in Athens, Georgia, USA, and I have been asked the question, the big question, what does photography mean to me? And first I would say that photography has no intrinsic meaning in and of itself. It's a tool, nothing more. A chef may have a fondness for his or her spatula, but finally it's just a tool. And the mammoth beast of photography, all the various uses of photography, is not something that I really think about too much or dwell upon. I would paraphrase James Agee, who wrote in an essay in Helen Levitt's book, A Way of Seeing, that only a few practitioners have really helped us to see better. Most photography has sort of dumbed down people's ability to see. It's made people blind. But a small percentage have really improved our ability to see. If some mad scientist were to strap me to a table, or some very mean sorcerer were going to cast a spell on me, and they told me that they were going to wipe from my memory all traces of the late work of Eugène Auger or the early work of Henri Cartier-Bresson, I would be more than terrified. Jean Renoir, the great filmmaker, the son of the painter, was asked whether cinema is art, and his answer was, what does it matter? He compared cinema to baking bread, which was very French of him. He said that it's something that can be done wonderfully, and anything that can be done wonderfully is, that's enough. I think questions such as is cinema art is like other questions about meaning, which is really, is this valuable? Is doing this thing something to cherish? And it leads us to other questions like, what is the meaning of life? And does my life have meaning? And for all of these heavy questions, I would refer you to A Cat Lying in the Sun. The cat lying in the sun is not asking himself if his life has meaning. He knows that he is the meaning of his life. He has no guilt trip about lying in the sun. He doesn't feel like he has to do anything. He doesn't have to have a purpose. He is the purpose. We don't have to have purpose. We are the purpose. For me, photography has been the vessel, the funnel, the container that directs my thoughts. It orchestrates my life. And I can't really reach in deep enough to express all that it means to me. For me, photography is a kind of literature, but it's a literature that affects people not through words, but through images. Images can touch other people in a different space and time, and in a way that words cannot. It's a system of sharing, a way of touching other people, and somewhere in this is its meaning.
So my name is Paul Lowe. I'm a reader in documentary photography at London College of Communication, University of the Arts London, and I've been a photographer and writer and I guess now historian and academic of photography for more than 30 years. I think there are a couple of things about photography that I find fascinating. One of those things is its ability to deal with space and place, and the other one is its relationship to time and to temporality. I think for me, I'm very interested in photographs about the world. I'm not particularly interested in constructed images, but I am very interested in images that are about the world but allow an imaginative space for us to explore. So photographs of the real, but then lead us into thinking in a more profound and deep way about the nature of existence, the nature of humanity, the nature of the world, if you like. And I think one of photography's really unique capabilities as a medium that perhaps marks it out in some ways as special is its ability to pay attention to things that would otherwise go unnoticed. And I find photographers and photographs that do that super interesting, really fascinating. So something like Marshall Duchamp's picture, Dust Breeding, the idea that you could create an image of an entire universe almost that has all sorts of allusions to the First World War, to loss, to grief, to chaos, to structure, to form, simply made out of the way that dust falls on a sheet of glass, the most insignificant, the most unimportant detritus of life, as it were, dust, is transformed through the photographer's vision or the artist's vision into something really extraordinary and profound and deep. So that's the kind of photography that I think is really, really interesting. I also think that photography's relationship to time is really, really important. Photographs obviously are very much dictated by time. You have, the shutter, obviously, initially. But some photographs are taken in 1/100,000th of a second. Harold Edgerton's incredible images that show us how a drop of milk looks when it hits the surface, frozen, suspended in space. Or, Sugimoto's images of the screen of a movie theatre taken during the entire duration of a film, or something like, let's say, Simon Norfolk's pictures of star trails and satellites taken during the expanse of a whole evening. So photography, obviously, in a very simple way, is related to time. But I think in a more profound and deep way, I think how we experience photographs is really interesting, because a photograph essentially is representing the past into the present moment. We can look at photographs taken in the very earliest days of photography in the mid-19th century, and they can still tell us something today, not just about that time that they were taken, but also these profound things about the nature of humanity, the nature of life, the nature of history. I find it very interesting with my own work. I've been a photographer since the late 1980s, and I covered particularly that period from sort of 1988 through to 1995, when the European revolutions were happening and the fall of communism, the end of the Iron Curtain, and the siege of Sarajevo. And looking back now, sort of 20, 30 years later, suddenly my work is now an archive. It's now history. I studied history at university. And I've realized that perhaps I was kind of working as a kind of coal miner of history, if you like, in those early days. I was very much aware that the things I was photographing were major global events that were going to become part of our historical narrative, and we're going to go into the historical record and become something that we would look back on as historical documents. And I think my attitude towards my work has shifted in many ways over that period, because at the time I was shooting it, I was trying to make the kind of dramatic, strong image that would be in the news magazines or the newspapers that encapsulated the essence of the moment. So I was very, very struck, obviously, by the aesthetics, by the formal qualities, as well as trying to make sure the content was strong. And then a period after, particularly this is true of my work in Sarajevo during the siege, where when I was first there, when I was there shooting there, I was trying to look for the images that would tell a story, that would tell the story of the survival of the citizens of that city under this incredible, difficult situation. But I was still looking for pictures that kind of had that immediacy, if you like. When I went back and re-edited that work 5 years later and 10 years later for the book that I did about Bosnia, I had a different emphasis. I was looking for perhaps the more subtle, the quieter images, still with a very strong aesthetic, but the pictures that kind of talked about that more state of mind, that more contemplative moments. And in fact, many of the images that ended up in the book that I did about Bosnia in 2005 were ones that I'd never even picked off the contact sheet. I'd never even edited at the time. They only sort of came to life, as it were, in that extraordinary process when you start mining your archive and going through the contact sheet frame by frame and revisiting it with that benefit of hindsight and looking for different kinds of pictures, the less obvious pictures, the quieter pictures, the more subtle moments, if you like. Now, looking at my archive 25 years later, I have a different perspective. And now what I'm really interested in those pictures from the war is who is in the pictures. What does it show? What details are there? The kind of almost ethnographic, anthropological details of the ways in which people survived, the fabric of the city, the fabric of the destruction of the city, the textures of destroyed walls, destroyed buildings, who built barricades, how were those barricades functioned, what protection did they give? So in a sense, a more purely documentary reading, if you like, of those images, where, who's in the pictures? Perhaps the photograph I took of a group of children is the only picture of those children that exists. And indeed, many of those people, sadly, are very possibly dead or were killed during the war, have died since then. So I think that's for me, a very interesting sense of how my own relationship to my own photography can change over time, and equally how a photograph can have all these multivalent meanings and multivalent uses depending on who's looking at it and what use it's being put to. And I think one of the things that I'm very interested in doing now with my life, my writing, my career, I guess, is to try to help people who are not perhaps photographers or desperately interested in photography realize that photography can be much more than a purely descriptive medium that just says this is what's there. That in fact it can be used, and photographs can be used as tools to think with and to analyze and to imagine with. And for me, the imaginative power of photographs of the real is where the really interesting things start to happen.
You have been listening to Daniel Meadows, Brian Griffin, Polly Alderton, Mark Stienmetz and Paul Lowe. A particularly sad element, I suppose, of the recording of What Does Photography Mean to You is how many of the photographers who have contributed have left us since their contributions were made. And that's certainly the case for Brian Griffin and Paul Lowe. Anyway, their words live on, and I hope you enjoyed this particular episode. More for you next week, and in the meantime, of course, take care.